It is my great pleasure to welcome all of you here. For those of you who don't know me, I am Bonnie Abramson. I am the Northern Area Vice President for the California Council of Square Dance Clubs. I have like 3 months left, so this is one of my last acts as the Northern Area VP. There's been a lot of discussion about SSD, the Social Square Dance Program, what it is, how it works, all of that. I know some clubs in Southern California got a lot of information. Those of us in Central and Northern California didn't get as much. So I was lucky enough to meet via a Zoom meeting, Mr. Barry Johnson. Barry is a caller, and he is a member of the CALLERLAB Governing Board and Vice Chairman of CALLERLAB's Social Square Dance Committee. And so it is my pleasure to introduce Barry and let him tell you more about what the program is and how it works.
Very good. Bonnie, I'm going to share my screen. I think you might have to give me permission to do that, if you would.
I just did, I believe. There
we go. All right. Click that, and here we are. So the Social Square Dance programming. There we go. A little bit about myself. I've been calling for not quite 20 years yet. Teaching every year since 2007, teaching a lot of classes. I typically teach or do workshops 3 to 4 nights a week, most weeks out of the year. I've held a few leadership positions around the Illinois Square Dance Callers, currently a member of the Board of Governors, working to become an accredited caller coach. I was all set for the final step when COVID hit. Everything got shut down, so that will come in time. As we get into it, just a little bit about sort of breaking news. Last April, CALLERLAB's membership was asked to vote on a resolution declaring that the Social Square Dance program would be an official program sponsored by the organization with the same sort of stature as Basic, Mainstream, Plus, Advanced, and Challenge. 2 days ago, the results of that vote were announced, and it did pass. So what we're talking about today is a dance program and a process for membership, growing membership in clubs, around the area, around the country. There's an awful lot to talk about. We'll cover a whole bunch of things as we go, and then we'll take questions towards the end. The big focus about social square dancing is growth in membership, adding new dancers to the activity. How can we do that in ways that are different and more effective than things that we've tried in the past? If you believe that your club, that your group is doing just fine the way you are, don't change. Don't worry about it. If you're happy with what you've got, keep doing it. Not suggesting that you change. On the other hand, if you're worried that perhaps membership in your club or dancing in your area has been declining over the last several years, as it has in most places, maybe this is a topic we should be talking about with you. If you're getting desperate, if your club's getting down to just a few number of people, this is definitely something we should be talking about. It does involve, in many cases, a little bit of a culture change for a given club. That kind of culture change is hard, but we can talk through about what the challenges are and how people have done it. So the big thing, social square dancing, is an approach to dramatically increase club membership. It's not an immediate thing. It happens over the course of a few years. Part of the program involves a smaller list of calls, smaller than Mainstream, smaller than Plus. But it's not just the list of calls, it's a whole process and an approach on how you handle recruiting and getting new dancers in. There are 3 just key foundational principles here. Make it easier for new dancers to start and to finish with their lessons, to let people enjoy the dance within 90 days of getting started. Pardon me, I have a sneeze working its way out. So letting people experience the joy of the dance right away within 90 days of starting their stuff, and then to harness that fresh enthusiasm that comes with those new members and put them to work for us immediately, right away, to get that energy going to help work with the next cycle. So fundamentally, what we suggest that you teach roughly 50 calls, depending on how you number or measure or count the calls. Teach roughly 50 calls in 12 weeks, in about a 90-day period. And then you let them dance. They come to club dances, they feel like the dances are for them, they enjoy the dance, and then you do it over again. Not next year, you do it over again right away. And when you're done with that, the next 12 weeks after that, you do it over again. Okay? Teach 50 calls, 3 months, let them dance, do it over. Now, a little bit of history on this. Robin Reagan from Radar O'Reilly's hometown of Ottumwa, Iowa, was asked to teach a group of interested people in a town about half an hour away in south central Iowa. They'd heard about square dancing and they were kind of interested. So Robin came over and he chose not to worry about the mainstream list. What he did was he would just teach for a couple of months and then hold dances for them. And then he'd do it again, and he did it again. And sure enough, within some relatively short period of time, within a year or so, he had 30 and 40 and 50 people coming to his dances. Now, Fairfield, Iowa, the place that this happened at, happened to be Jerry Story's childhood hometown. His in-laws and his mother-in-law were still there. It was Christie's hometown as well. And so when Jerry gave up his winter programs in Texas and North Carolina and so on to stay back at his hometown, he got back and there's suddenly this big club active in his town. And he realizes that this approach is the thing that we've been missing, not worrying about the whole list, keeping it simple, just let them dance. So Jerry then got out sort of his metaphorical microphone. We all know that those of us that know Jerry know that he had a loud voice in many different ways. He recruited others across the nation, and they started sort of formalizing this program. People started using it. Kip Garvey with the Jackson Claim Jumpers was an early adopter. Here in this area, I'd like to tell you about what we've experienced here in the Chicago suburbs. So much of this presentation will be about our real life experiences with this program. In this area, a caller by the name of Bob Asp decided to take a stand. He was asked to teach 0 to plus for 2 clubs, Woodstock Squares and McHenry B&B, that were combining for their lessons. And Bob looked at him and said, no, I'm not going to do it. He says, I'm going to teach this 50 call program instead. And if you don't like that, go find a different instructor. Oh my gosh. They really wanted Bob as an instructor. And so they kind of gulped and they said, well, okay. And that started working. That started going along for them. Then another club in the area by the name of Glenview Squares, some of their membership was getting desperate. Their membership was declining. They weren't getting new members in very, very well at all. And some of the newer members of the club thought it really needed to be fixed. So they picked up and embraced this social square dance program. They started another club, the North Shore Squares. We'll talk about them. My club is Arlington Squares. We'll talk about them. All these groups that started embracing this particular dance program, changing our culture of dance, showed repeated success. It began to work in place after place after place, multiple clubs around the area, not depending on having outstanding callers. Certainly there's a number of outstanding callers around the country, many of whom have done this. But it doesn't take a top line caller to make it work. Every day, work a day, average callers are showing success. And we're seeing it in different demographics, in rural areas, in suburban areas, in more urban dense type things. Everywhere we go, we're seeing success with this. Coast to coast, we're seeing it in Pennsylvania, we're seeing it in the Midwest, we're seeing it in Texas, we saw some of it there in California. So how much success and growth are we talking about? Woodstock Squares, one of the first groups to go into this, their membership is up by about 60%, and they're still growing faster than they were. Now, they've had some turnover in their club caller and instructor. Bob started working with them on this, Bob asked, but then he was asked to take over Marshall Flippo's winter program in Tucson. So Bob, left the area during our peak teaching time. Lottie Buckby took over as the caller for that group. And then Lottie decided to move back to her home state of Minnesota. And so they're now working on their third caller here, still having, but they're still showing success with this. They're still committed to the program. Their membership up by 60%. They like that, but they'll do better. Glenview Squares, the one we talked about, went from 23, 24 members up to 90 members in 3 years. Well, that's interesting. And along the way, they actually spun off a related club about 10 minutes away. North Shore Squares went from startup, the first new club in the Chicago area in decades. They went from startup to 60 members in their first 2 years. And they've continued growing since then. My club, Arlington Squares, we've seen about 50% growth in our membership in the first 2 years that we've been using the Social Square Dance program. And then COVID hit. We had 14 more dancers in class at the time. We were looking to, that would have taken us up to about 65% growth. We're certainly expecting to start with it again this coming September. Now, one of the two clubs that started at the beginning, Woodstock and McHenry B&B, were working together. McHenry B&B decided they didn't like the Social Square Dance program. They dropped it. They went to actually a sort of very straight mainstream approach. We're going to teach mainstream. We're going to teach the full mainstream program the way it ought to have been done. They graduated 2 new members in their first year. And halfway through their second year, all of their new dancers quit. And so McHenry is getting another caller coming in. I'm not sure which way they're going to go right now, but certainly they're not happy with the change after they went away from the Social Square Dance program, particularly as they look at their neighbor club who's growing and doing well. So for decades, we have all been talking about declining membership and how do we lose dancers and where can we go and all the reasons. And I'm sure that every one of you can probably list a dozen contributing causes to how we lose dancers and where we see them go away along the way. It ranges from lessons sounding too intimidating or lengthy or too much commitment right at the beginning that even discourages people from asking questions about starting, or once they hear, they might go away and just never start. And then all the way down to the other end, after people succeed, it takes sometimes several months before they could get their friends back into the program and everything that happens in between. The Social Square Dance program offers improvements along the way in all of these different areas. Just for example, if you were to talk to somebody about square dancing and say, we're really happy with this and we'd like you to come along. After all, it would only take 9 months of lessons and you can dance with us. 9 months of lessons, or even if it's 4 or 5 months, and that's not quite as interesting. On the other hand, if you can say, we'll have you dancing with our club in 90 days, well, that sounds a whole lot better. That's something that particularly Uh, Generations a little bit younger than some of us are much more willing to consider, a 90-day commitment as opposed to a 4 or 5 month commitment or a 9-month commitment. Another thing that happens is that with the 12-week lesson plan, and if it's 13 or 14, whatever, but about 12 weeks, if you can schedule that lesson plan so that the major holidays around the year don't necessarily interfere. You can start in mid to late September and be done before Christmas. And so you don't get the Christmas break interfering in the middle of lessons. You can start after Christmas in January and be done by springtime before the summer restructuring things happen. And when you do 3 or possibly even 4 sets of lessons in a year, if you have somebody that finds they have to drop out for some reason, they were ill and missed a few weeks, they had to go deal with, be a caregiver to somebody else for a while, they broke a leg, or even if they took a vacation for a while, that made it so they couldn't continue with class, you can get them to rejoin and pick up again in just a few weeks when our next round of lessons starts. So you're able to recycle people back in if you wish. We'll talk a little bit more about how exactly we do this, a little bit more precisely here. But just as another factor here is that the list of calls we work with in the SSD program, we intentionally skip some of the basic and mainstream calls that are somewhat harder for people to learn, that tend to pile on towards the end of the mainstream or list, or as people are getting into plus, they begin to feel overwhelmed many times. We want to stop teaching new things just before people start feeling overwhelmed. we take them up through what they can handle and then stop teaching, let them dance, and then we can continue after that. But then the most important thing is when we get these new dancers coming out of our lessons, we want them to believe that the club dances are for them. It's not that they're allowed to come to a dance that other people are doing. These club dances are aimed at them. The dances are for them. And maybe there's some other people that might do something along the way. All of these different ways of doing this, all these different things that happen, gives us larger classes, gives us a higher percentage of graduates, makes a better transition. We lose fewer people as they go from being dancers in lessons to full-fledged club members. And then the more frequent classes pick up those that need to start over, or if you have somebody who's not quite, they're trying, but they're not picking it up as quickly as others, you can encourage them just, hey, we got another class starting again. Why don't you come help us out with the next class? Go through it all again. You can keep those people you might lose otherwise, pick up on ones that need to start over, and then best recruiting tool of all, we know that face-to-face contact, personal requests, somebody who's recently gotten into it and is enthusiastic about what they've learned, they are the best recruiters that we have. And so we can put these new enthusiastic graduates to work right away and get their friends in just a few weeks to start over again. Now, this is not something that provides instant results. The first class that somebody does with social square dancing probably looks a lot like the class that you might be teaching now in terms of size and people that are there. It's probably not a lot different. But if you've only been teaching classes once per year, well, shoot, if you teach a second class that same year, it's probably of the same size as the first one. And now you've got 2 sets of graduates. Right now, you've just doing a second one in the same year, you've doubled your new dancer growth. But now you've also got 2 sets of new graduates that are recruiting for your third class. And that's where we start seeing the third class is usually a bit larger in size. And when you get done with the third class, the fourth class, you've got more people out recruiting again, and the class is a little bit larger. And pretty soon, this is where the feedback starts happening and the growth really begins to kick in. Usually in the second year, the third year, that's when we start seeing the growth. It's not an instant magic bullet. It's not a Lone Ranger silver bullet. It's a process that if you commit to and stick with it over time, it gives you results over time, but when you stay with it. The success in this program is not because of the 50 call program itself, although the 50 call program reinforces that, makes it possible. The success is shorter lessons, simpler lessons, repeated multiple times per year. All these small improvements add up. They reduce losses across many areas, and repeated application works. You see the 60 and 70 and 90% growth. Deborah Carroll Jones down in the Dallas area has been using this program now for 2 years. She took her club from 60 members to 120 members. They doubled in size in those 2 years. They're looking to grow further. Noah Sigmund started with virtually nothing in his area in rural Wisconsin, outside, 60 miles outside of Milwaukee. And they've now got 7 and 8 squares that come to their lessons every night, of which 1 or 2 squares are new each time they cycle through. We see it over and over again, different areas of the country. Pennsylvania, Scott Brown, the Browns, and Lisa Minton, they work with 3 different clubs. They report that this year alone, since January of this year, they've brought in 10 squares of new dancers in those 3 clubs based off of this program. They're in the western central Pennsylvania area, a little bit east of Pittsburgh type thing. So we're seeing this over and over again around people having success. Now, the SSD program does use a selected list of calls drawn from the basic and mainstream programs. There's about 50 calls. It's about the same size as the current basic list, but calls like the THAR family, THAR stars and slip the clutch and shoot the star, those things are left off of this list. Many of the mainstream calls are left off. Cloverleaf, walk and dodge are gone away. Spin the top is not on the list. Many of the calls that involve a 3/4 arm turn or dancers that are moving forward in a path that isn't like a circulate, walk and dodge. You know how many people, as they're trying to learn walk and dodge, flip over because they've been used to circulates turning them around when they're a leader facing out. So those kinds of calls that cause a little bit of disruption as people are learning or give them some new concept, those are left off the list. Some of the most popular mainstream calls to use in dances, as long as they're still relatively easy to teach, they're left on. So the list does include scoot back and recycle and tag the line. But so it's a little bit different list than what people have been accustomed to. Again, it's about 50-ish calls, but I think that's counting flutter wheel and reverse flutter wheel as a single call that's got some symmetry to it. So depending on how you count it, some people might think that there's more than 50 on there, but it's 50 conceptual calls, as it were. The focus on these calls is on standard arrangements and standard applications, not technical completeness. CALLERLAB has said for years that lessons should strive to teach each call from many arrangements and many formations. As teachers, callers want to produce good dancers. We're proud of the dancers that we teach. We want them to be able to go and dance to anyone else and be good dancers. That's part of our part of what we really feel good about as teachers. But if we look at any other sport or hobby that has teaching or coaching or learning, can you tell me anything else that tries to teach full complexity of the activity to brand new beginners? No. You don't teach new kids learning how to play football about offensive or defensive line stunting and double teaming over here and switching over there. You don't teach drag bunts to kids playing t-ball. No, you don't do that. You don't teach lifts to new ballerinas on their first year. No, you start with basic, simple stuff, give them a foundation, and then you do continuing education beyond that. That's what we need to get to. We need to stop trying to teach full complexity of all this stuff to brand new dancers. And that's part of what simplifies, letting us get these calls done within 12 weeks. We reduce what we teach about each call, but at the same time, we focus on fun, and we focus on getting the dances to where a new graduate can come off of their last lesson and go to a club dance and feel welcome, and that the dance was at a level that they can succeed at. So we stay with sort of standard applications, stay with standard arrangements. Not to say you never get into any sort of other arrangement, but if we do, we take the dancers back out of it fairly quickly and easily. So we've been looking at a lot of things to avoid the trivial, simple dances, avoiding using a swing through, boys run, Ferris wheel, centers pass through 100 times a night. We don't want that. So we try and find ways that we can do, many of you have heard themes of different but not difficult type of things. On the SSD committee, we call that standard applications with variety, as opposed to extended applications. Just for example, how many, we think of the calls lead right and lead left. We use them from static squares all the time. Well, a little bit of variety might be doing something like a lead right or a lead left from, say, facing lines of 4. Go up to the middle and back, everybody lead right, trade by, there's your corner, element left. We can find things that are different, not difficult, and then find ways to work those into the dances and the tips and make them feel better. It's perfectly okay when somebody's using the SSD program with a club. It's perfectly okay to workshop something that's used just at that dance. Callers just shouldn't expect that the people coming in the door know it when they walk in, and shouldn't expect that they remember it when they leave. I had fun one dance for a bit of variety that we workshopped the C2 call Shazam, which is just single hinge and you turn back. And we played with Shazam in a few tips during the night, and the dancers thought that was different and interesting, and that was fine. They could go away and they had a little bit of fun that night. They went away, they never remembered it again. That's perfectly fine. But what we're seeing in this area with many clubs in the area, several clubs in the area doing this program, we're seeing that the focus on simpler choreography that's more flowing, it just gives us a better energy dance, higher energy, faster moving, more wind in the face. And our dancers are responding very well to that. They're becoming more enthusiastic. They're really enjoying the dances more than when we were doing a little bit more choreographic complexity and a little bit more puzzle solving. We say that the social square dance program, this list of 50 calls, should be a destination. What do I mean by that? I mean that we should allow dancers to learn this level of dance, this 50 call program, and then let them dance at that level as long as they want to dance at that level. Some dancers we've found choose to just stay there and they don't ever want to learn anymore. They're having plenty of fun with it. It's meeting all of their needs. They just want to stay there. Now, other dancers might want to move on. Other dancers dance it for a while and they start getting interested for more. That's okay. We can offer them more growth. We can offer them continuing education, whether that be extended applications or additional calls used in other programs. Take them through mainstream and plus and advanced and eventually to challenge if they want. But the clubs that have offered SSD that have kept their concept of we're a mainstream club or we're a plus club, and oh yeah, we let some SSD dancers come to our dances. Those folks have not shown as much growth as ones that have kind of conceptually changed their principal, their primary dance level to this program. If you think of as a new dancer, as somebody just coming out, if you go to a group that thinks of themselves as a plus club with some SSD tips, you feel like a second-class citizen. On the other hand, if the club says, we're an SSD club and yes, we do some plus tips, well, that's different. You can feel, the new dancers feel like they're belonging more right at the beginning. And sure, there are some folks that know more than they do. That's not a surprise. But it's a change in kind of focus for the club and self-identity of the club. And we'll talk about how difficult that is. Final point, SSD is not necessarily the final destination for every dancer, but it should be a destination that dancers can stop at, stay at, as long as they want to do it. From a caller's perspective, we kind of have to educate ourselves a little bit or look at ourselves and say, do I really need spin the top to put on a fun dance? Do I really need walk and dodge or an alamandar? Or can we entertain without that type of complexity? You know, so as a caller, we have to focus on the entertainment aspect more so than the choreographic treats that we might discover. Oh, look, this is really cool. If we do this sequence here, wow, isn't that neat? No, you know, save that for other later continuing education. Just focus on the fun, on the flow, on the smooth, easy dancing. That's the way to do it. Now for clubs, we're talking about a change in identity, a change in the way that clubs think about how in the way that they perceive themselves. This is a difficult thing. This is particularly club leaders that have gotten to where they are. They are the survivors that made it through the longer lessons programs, and maybe they've been dancing 5 or 10 or 20 or 30 or 50 years. And so for them, this has been a way of life. And thinking about changing that, that's tough. There are a lot of fears. You know, we've always been a plus club. We've been a mainstream club for 50 years. We can't change now. You know, our dances will be boring and our members will quit and go somewhere else, and other clubs won't come to visit us if we don't use the full program. All these fears come out, and they're very real fears. People talk about, well, if we dance a different program than others, we won't be able to take our new dancers to other clubs, and we think that's really important. Okay. And one of my favorite fears was, I was talking with one group about teaching two sets of lessons in a year, and the club president looked at me and said, oh no, we couldn't possibly do that. Our angels can't teach one a year now. That's asking way too much of them. There's no way we could possibly do 2 sets of lessons in a year. You know, I looked the guy in the eye and said, sounds like you need more angels, don't you? He said, yeah. Well, you get those through new lessons. Do more lessons, you'll get more angels. You'll take the load off the people you've got. It works. So what we see around the country is, as over the last few years, as we've been talking to folks, The earliest adopters in any region have been the clubs that have been most concerned about declining membership. Some of the clubs that feel like they were on the edge of going out of business or seriously considering it and they were willing to take a big risk in their minds in order to address the issue of memberships. We know that there are some groups, some clubs that may completely refuse to consider this kind of change until they see somebody else in their area having success. And we know there are other groups that will just completely refuse to consider it all, because they think they're doing just fine, or even if they're not doing fine, they're not interested in changing. They just want to ride this horse till it's dead. Okay, that's fine. If you're in a group that doesn't want to consider this, that's fine. Welcome to it. You recognize, though, that if conditions are changing around you and you're not adapting to those changing conditions, you may be at risk of dying as a club. Evolution in action, it happens. So we do see groups even in our area that are choosing not to do this. However, they're not growing. The groups that have adopted it in our area are the ones that are growing, and we'll see what happens over time. But if you do have somebody within an area that commits to this program for a while, and they start showing success the first year and the second year and the third year, and this starts building on itself, then we start seeing that other clubs in an area become more willing to follow. And once you have a partner or two or three that you can work with, other clubs around, now you're raising the talk within local associations. And as the word gets out, even more clubs consider the change and start making it. And so the real question for a club, are we worried about our growth? Are we worried about the direction that we're going? And if we are we willing to risk a change in order to have a good chance for better growth in membership? If you are, this is worth talking about. Some of the hard parts, if you look at changing your primary dance program, how do we fit this in? We've been a plus club with rounds, and we do occasional advanced star tips. How do we incorporate SSD into our dance program? It's not easy. It's not easy to make those changes. But consider, if you would, how much floor time a new graduate from a class would get. If whatever new dance program, dance structure, schedule that you're looking at only gives those new dancers 2 or 3 tips in a night, it's probably not enough. So what we've learned is that for our clubs that have adopted this program, if they aren't SSD only, and there is one that's SSD only and doing very, very well, if they aren't SSD only, we've learned first tip, last tip of the night, both need to be SSD, and at least half of the other tips in the middle. If we do that, then the dances feel like they're SSD dances, maybe with some extra stuff. And that's been sort of the most successful way we've changed our dance nights. Some of the clubs that have done round dancing in the past have chosen to drop rounds or reduce them somewhat. We've experimented with different things like offering SSD square dancing with rounds, one time a month, and plus with rounds a different time of the month. And we'll talk about a couple different things. But what we found through our experience here is that the experienced dancers have reacted better to the 50 call program than we expected. We thought experienced dancers would thumb their nose at it and turn away, and we were willing to write them off in order to get more new dancers in. But because the SSD dancers have higher energy, more flowing choreography, it feels more like I won't say a hot hash dance, but they're just more fun dances. And so we found that even the experienced plus dancers really enjoy those tips. And so they're coming to the dances, not grudgingly, but they're coming to because they know they'll have a good time. Many times we have folks that come in that are experienced mainstream dancers, and they don't even realize that we're not using quite all of the mainstream list, that there's a dozen or so calls that we're leaving off. And so they have a good time without even realizing that they're not using the full list. My club, we found that our guest attendance has increased since we switched to SSD. We planned and expected a decrease, but we find we get more people coming since we've switched to SSD as our primary dance program. We used to get 4 to 6 squares at our dances. A 6-square night was a good night 3 years ago. We're now getting, up right before COVID, we're typically getting 7 to 9 squares, sometimes 10 squares in a night. And we were on this upward trajectory before COVID hit. We're not back to the level of having 20 squares a night like we used to have 20 years ago. But at least we're doing better than we had in any of the previous 10 years before making this switch. So, my club, I can tell you, we're happy about this. After having, our club is nearly 75 years long. We started in 1948, did kind of just dancing. When CALLERLAB was organized in the 70s, we organized around the mainstream and eventually the plus list as it stabilized. So my club has been a plus club for 30 some years. And we went from 120 people down to 40-ish people. And then we turned it around. We're back up in the 60s now and on an upward trajectory. Perhaps the most successful club in our area is Glenview Squares. They were a long-time established plus club. Some of the dancers in their club were very concerned about the trajectory their club was on. They were beginning to be one of the oldest average age clubs in the area. Although they were getting good support from guest dancers, their membership of their club was declining year over year over year over year. And some of the folks felt they needed to fix this. They needed to change this. And so they talked to enough membership that new club leadership was voted in. And the new club leadership chose to go this way. And they chose to drop round dancing and go with alternating SSD and plus tips. This was hard. But their new format is no round dancing. They do alternating tips with very short breaks. Caller comes in, you finish one tip, take a drink of water, find your next song, find your next music. Dancers that want to sit down, sit down. Dancers are back on the floor right away. Many of them never leave the floor. They just stay there and wait for the next tip. You catch your breath and you're off and running on the next tip. 1-2 minutes is kind of a long time in between tips. It just goes and goes and goes. And then they take a bigger break, just a hard stop in the middle of the dance, 15, sometimes 20 minutes in the middle of a 2.5-hour dance. Let everybody have some refreshments, let everybody socialize for a bit, do their announcements during the hard break in the middle, and then get back to near continuous dancing again. Again, the first and last tip, always SSD. We're finding that the majority of the plus dancers are on the floor for every SSD tip. Better than we expected. The nonstop action, the going, 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 feels like you're at a convention every dance. Going, 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 going. You sit down when you want, fine, take breaks. They've got all the refreshments and stuff. But if you want to dance, there's as much dancing as you want. Now the callers, they have to work harder. I'm doing 12 to 14 tips a night instead of 6 or 7. Okay. But as a caller, I'm really enjoying it because I have better control over the energy of the dance. I can control the flow through my programming of tips for what we want. I I also get paid more when I call at Glenview because I'm not splitting money with a queuer. And they're getting 10 and 12 and 14 squares a night. You know, this is nice. This is good. So we've talked about the emotional stress a little bit. This kind of change, particularly moving away from round dancing, did cause a rift within their membership. A couple of folks quit the club and joined others. Yeah, I think there were probably 3 or 4 couples that went somewhere else. A couple of those folks are still bitter. I will never be in the same room with those people again. Well, okay. But their club went from 20 some members to up to 90 members. From the standpoint of the club, their club is far, far stronger and far larger than it was. And if that's important, then they were success. Then this has certainly been a success. It's now very dynamic, vigorous club. Lots of new folks coming in, lots of energy, lots of dance. Any of those previous members are certainly welcome every time, but that's the way it is. Some of the members of that club that were happy with the growth and the dance program, they started an SSD only new club, 10 or sometimes 15 miles away, depending on where they dance. They worked with their local park districts to do some lessons, recruited dancers. They went from 0 dancers from startup to 60 members in their first 2 years. And then they've continued growing since then. If you Google around in CALLERLAB, and particularly in the knowledge base, you can find some articles about the North Shore Squares and their successful program and what they've done. They've written about it, and that's certainly there. My club watched Glenview and North Shore having success. I did sort of force the issue with our club. I told them I was not willing to teach 0 to plus anymore as an instructor. That was a little bit of a shock. So if you want to do that, that's fine, but find somebody else. But once we got over that little bit of shock and seriously started talking about it, the club members generally all came in favor of doing this, particularly as we talked to our newer graduates and newer dancers. What if we had stopped teaching after the first 50 calls and let you dance for a while? Would you have been more comfortable with that? Oh, yes, they said. Yes, we would have been. Boy, would that have been nice. I was really struggling towards the end of our lessons, and if we could have stopped it earlier, I would have felt a whole lot better. This is what the new dancers are telling us. Why do we need to put them through this? So as we talked over a period of months, club membership finally came around, and we did have one sort of vocal objector. I just want to do plus. I don't want to do this anymore. She's still with the club. She still dances. She still supports the lessons. Every now and then she grumbles, I wish we'd just stayed where we were. Yeah, that's fine. That's okay, Joan. We're good. Our biggest discussion was how to change our dance format, our nightly dances, from being plus with alternating plus and rounds to doing something else. We dance 2 or 3 times a month. We tried having some dances as SSD only with rounds. We tried other ones as SSD and plus with no rounds, or we would do some dances that were plus only, some SSD only. We did what we finally sort of settled on this last year before COVID was alternating SSD and plus tips, very short breaks. And then that 15-minute break in the middle, 15, 20 minutes, is focused on round dancing. So we do 30 minutes of rounds beforehand, give another 15, 20 minutes in the middle of the dance, exclusively round dancing. So our round dancers are getting pretty much the same amount of round dancing as they did before. They're still getting 45 minutes of rounds at a dance, but it's kind of packaged around the focus on the square dancing for the night. Now, in this area, I don't know about your area, we're losing cuers. We're not getting new cuers coming in, and several of our cuers have retired. we may not be able to get cuers for our dances anymore as we go forward. We found that the last 2 sets of club cuers we have both retired from cueing. So I don't know what's going to happen with rounds in our dances. So moving on a little bit to the topic of dancer portability, taking dancers from your group and visiting other clubs. Having a mixture of clubs in the area that are offering different dance levels certainly does affect who can go where. If you're the only club in an area trying to implement SSD, the 50 call program, it can feel lonely, but you can mix it up by bringing in different callers instead of always having a same club caller night after night, and make your dances feel like you're going to different places. And being honest, it doesn't hurt if everybody can come to you. The thing that really hurts is if fewer clubs can come to your club. So being the only SSD club doesn't really cut out your market. It kind of works the other way around. And honestly, some other clubs might feel threatened if one group switches to SSD. But what we see is, again, this is around the area, not just here, around the country. When one club in an area succeeds with this dance programs, others are more willing to change. Now you have partners, and now it grows. Our local association did agree to turn our mainstream hall into just an SSD hall for our 2 annual association dances. Our association has 2 big dances, one fall and one spring, as fundraisers for the association. And we've typically had a mainstream hall and a plus hall, sometimes with an advanced hall off to the side. And they did agree to change the mainstream hall, just turn that into SSD. That hall actually now has more dancers than the others. We've got a big gym that we use for the plus hall. The SSD dancing is more in a cafeteria-like setting. Part of the floor is carpet, part of it is a tile floor. It has more people dancing than the big hall. It's also closer to the food, and there's more tables and comfortable seating. Instead of sitting on bleachers, you've got tables and chairs, and it has better sound. It's not as echoey as the big concrete gymnasium. So there's probably other things that contribute towards this, but we typically will see half again as many dancers in our SSD hall at our association, which surprised the heck out of us. But this is what the dancers are happy doing. For our state convention in 2020, we were going to do the same thing. We were just going to replace the mainstream hall with the 50 call program with SSD and just do that. Unfortunately, that 2020 summer convention got canceled, as did this summer's convention as well. So a year from now, I'm not sure what our state convention is going to do yet. We'll have to talk about that. But the success we were seeing in this area is raising awareness throughout our state and the area. And we're seeing more and more willingness to adopt this 50 call program and dance it based off of seeing that success. We are also having conversations with the National Executive Committee and with the national conventions that are being planned. There will be SSD dancing in Jackson. In fact, one of their advertising campaigns is featuring that, and the big long list of good callers that they've got going on with that. So we're seeing that dancer portability for brand new dancers. The newest dancers often aren't quite as willing to travel as those that have been around a while. Once you get a partner or two, the travel is easier, moving to other places, seeing more experiences. Bringing in different callers helps give those different experiences. And then pretty soon it starts to grow at the larger level as we gain adoption. Now, one of the other common questions that we get, if you just look at the list of calls, and again, depending on how you count it, the SSD program is essentially the CALLERLAB basic program minus do paso, walk around your corner and seesaw. And do paso we can teach just as directional calling with with terms. You just don't necessarily have to put the label on it. It's just a series of arm turns. We add to that these calls from mainstream. We add hinge, centers in and cast off 3/4. We add slide through as just the variation of star through. We do add folds in order to support recycle. We add tags and scoot back. Okay, depending on how you count the calls, there's only about 12 calls or 12 call families missing from the full mainstream program. And so those of us that are experienced dancers, we look at that and say, well, they're so close to mainstream. Why not? Tell you what, sure, we'll teach SSD, but then we'll just do a workshop, do one workshop at every dance, and pretty soon we'll have everybody up to full mainstream. It'll be fine. Well, no, wait a minute. Let's take a look at it not from the perspective of an experienced dancer looking back. Instead, let's look at a new dancer who's looking up at the square dance mountain instead of down from the top. When we look up from the bottom, we see just by count alone, adding 12 calls to a 50 call program increases the size of that program by almost 25%. But the extra calls, alamandars and shoot this clutch and spin the top and Dixie style, even walk and dodge, these are calls that are considered somewhat harder to learn. They typically involve moving around in ways that people have not been moving prior to this. And so those calls actually, the difficulty of learning these calls is harder than the per call difficulty on the earlier ones. So when you factor that in, going from all of SSD to all of mainstream is more like 50 or 60% more difficult than what they know when they graduate. But then there's even more, because SSD is focused on standard positions and standard arrangements and standard formations. If you want to do mainstream, you should do full up mainstream from many arrangements and many formations. And when you add that into the process as well, the step from SSD to a full mainstream program is just about as large as the step from 0 to SSD. If we go to take an SSD graduate to a full mainstream program, we're asking them to essentially double the complexity that they've learned so far. That's a big step. If you're looking up at the mountain, get into full mainstream is actually a big step. But this is the true simplification that lets us do the 50 call list in only 24 hours worth of lesson time, as opposed to the 58 hours that's recommended by CALLERLAB for full mainstream. And I know a lot of clubs don't teach the full mainstream and they compress the lessons down to maybe 16 weeks, so 30, 35 hours of teaching or whatever. There's still a big gap between SSD and mainstream. Now, moving somebody up to full mainstream in time is perfectly fine, but it should be a continuing education type of thing taken by those dancers that choose to move beyond the SSD dance level, not feeling pushed to it, not feeling that they have to do this in order to go somewhere else. Even though it's just 12 more calls, it feels like a big increase in complexity. So we suggest that dancers learn these standard applications, that they're able to dance the ones with variety. We use some easy symmetry. Swing through from a right-handed wave, left swing through from a left-handed wave, feels so much alike that it's not difficult, but yet we avoid things like the right-handed swing through from a left-handed wave where the centers start. Yeah, stay away from that piece of it. We've got enough symmetry and enough things we can do for variety without needing those. Then we can go on and we can do extended applications and workshops and DVD type things and all of that, even within the SSD program, and then move on to the full mainstream for those dancers that choose to do it when they feel ready to do it. That's just fine. In our area, we've typically done 0 to SSD and then SSD to plus as a continuing education thing. And we're finding that going from SSD to plus still takes us between 16 and 20 weeks. But by the time that a dancer has been dancing for like a year at the SSD level, and they've been through lessons as an angel a few times, they have a rock solid base for what they know. And it's much easier for them now to pick up on these next things after they've danced like a year or 2 years at the previous level. So we're getting, we've sort of deferred what it takes to get people into plus lessons, but those that do choose to take it are more motivated. They have a better foundation for doing plus, and they come out of plus lessons as better plus dancers than what we were getting before. So even though we focus primarily on SSD as our primary dance level, we're still doing plus lessons for after they've danced for a while, and we're getting better dancers out of it. So coming here close to the end, the social square dance level, yes, it has a list of about 50 calls. It's not just the list. It's a method for growth. The fundamental method is teach shorter, simpler classes more often and combine that with the joy of the dance. We know that club members and club leadership often resistant to making this cultural change in identity, but those clubs that have done this have shown large growth. Doubling and tripling membership over the course of a few years is not unusual. We've seen this in many places around the country. It's not unusual to double or triple membership in your club, and that's after just a few years. Who knows how long it's going to last beyond that? The change is difficult. It can be traumatic because of it's a change in self-identity, as it were. But those that can do it are seeing some really good rewards. There's a lot of information out here on the world. CALLERLAB SSD, if you Google that, you'll see the lesson plans and the teaching guide and sample choreography and singing call figures and commentary and the suggestions for the standard applications with variety and so on. Just for more information about the dance program and itself, there is a frequently asked questions that's been put together. There have been a lot of questions. The frequently asked questions list is 17 pages long, but it's got many questions and talks about a lot of obstacles and ways that folks have overcome it. There's information on the CALLERLAB knowledge base, callerlabknowledge.org. And there is a Facebook group called Social Square. Actually, I think I've got this spelled wrong. I believe it's Social Square Dancing. And that group has over 1,000 members in it now. And people ask questions and are willing to talk, and they're sharing success stories on there as well. So that's kind of a rapid fire discussion about the program and what's involved. I'd love to take questions or listen to comments now. What do you think?
I've got some questions. I think some of them have been answered, but we'll go through them anyway. I'm going to ask everybody to stay muted so that we avoid the background noise until, if you do come up with a question, then we'll take you one at a time. The first question that we had was, were the clubs you spoke about early in your presentation mostly at the mainstream or plus level before they started the SSD program?
In this area, in the Chicago suburbs, 20 years ago, we had 100 clubs in the area in our local association. We've now dropped down, we've lost 75% of those. We're down to 25 clubs in the association. Over the last 20 years that I've been dancing, or when I started 20 years ago, every club in the association was plus or above. We had no designated mainstream clubs in this area. So all of those clubs that I talked about from personal firsthand knowledge have been plus clubs. However, We've talked to others around the country in other places that were mainstream focused. And the mainstream focused clubs are seeing the same types of results as the ones I've been telling you about with our personal experience here. So the mainstream clubs themselves, those that were teaching full mainstream and taking 16 to 30 weeks to teach it, they're seeing the same levels of success and growth when they switch to a 12-week lesson focused on standard applications and repeat that over and over. There are some clubs that, for whatever reason, feel that have been doing just fine the way they are. Clubs, like in the Cincinnati area, there's a plus club with 120 members. They're not considering changing. That's perfectly fine. If it's working well, what they're doing is working, stay with it. But if you're concerned about growth, if you're worried about things, if you think you need to make some sort of change, this is seriously worth looking at.
Okay, thank you. Our next question was, speak to the impact on the retention of existing plus dancers if you move to this program. I think you touched on that, but
well, a little bit. There's actually an interesting thing that we've seen. Some of our plus dancers, a small number of the plus dancers said, well, if you're going to do more of this SSD, then I want to go look at advanced. Fine. Okay, so they went on to either do advanced or not, or they decided that that wasn't for them, or whatever. Another chunk of plus dancers, and this was interesting, another chunk of our experienced plus dancers has generally chosen to stay with only doing the SSD tips. They've stopped dancing plus because they find they enjoy the SSD tips more than they enjoy their plus tips. In some cases, it may be, shall we gracefully say, declining skills. In other cases, it's just that they didn't need that level of choreographic richness. They were more interested in wind and face and just felt better about it. Others felt that staying current with their plus was too much of a commitment for them, and they could be a more casual dancer at the SSD level and feel good about it. So actually, what we're finding is that we're retaining more dancers, more experienced plus dancers than we had before, for a variety of different reasons. So retention of plus dancers unexpectedly went up, not down.
Great. All right, I'm going to skip over one question because there was other comments later on, and we'll come back to that. But are new dancers, or the members that you're getting, mostly from the quote unquote new empty nest or recent retiree demographic, or are you seeing them across the board?
Another good question. Again, I'll speak about personal experience in this area. We haven't gathered statistics from others around the country, so I can't answer for other parts of the country here. But in this area, prior to the clubs making these changes, we were typically seeing new dancers come in that were in their 60s and 70s. Some in the 50s, but mostly 60s, and some in the 70s. Now we're starting to see that shift a few years younger. We're seeing the occasional sets of dancers in their 40s. Most are in their 50s, and some in their 60s, and we still get the occasional 70 coming in. I don't know what contributes to this. I'm not sure if it's the friends bringing friends recruiting, where the younger dancers that just came in might be better recruiters than the other dancers. It may be that the dance program is more acceptable to younger folks as they come in. We are seeing a shift. I don't want to say it's conclusive yet, but we're seeing a shift towards younger dancers here that's noticeable. Now we do look up at Noah Sigmund's program in Wisconsin. Noah is, gosh, he's probably in his 30s now, I would guess, and got some younger brothers in their 20s. And the three of them are running a club out of their farm areas in Wisconsin. and they built their own dance hall, and they've been doing it for a number of years, and they catered at younger folks, their demographics in that area. They are drawing a large family program. If you go to the Facebook Social Square Dancing group, Noah and his brothers are posting videos from each of their lessons. They just did their 4th week, week 4 of their latest SSD class, and posted a big chunk of that. And you'll see that they've got several squares of dancing with kids, maybe 7 and 8 and 10, dancing with their parents, as well as a large number of teens and 20s there, as well as folks in their 50s and 60s. So we see that the Sigmund family program is drawing a wide variety of dancers to their area. So it's working for them too.
Okay, thanks, Barry. All right, I'm going to kind of combine 3 questions into a multi-stage question because they're all related. You talked about increased success in students becoming club members. What programs are the clubs dancing when the students migrate to the club? Is it SSD, mainstream, or plus? The next part of it is, when do these dancers go to the mainstream and plus? I think you kind of touched on that. And then when do clubs offer membership to new dancers?
Yeah, this was part of the change in identity that I'm talking about. Just for example, my club, Arlington Squares, viewed ourselves as, we are a plus club. That's what we do. We are a plus club. And we changed. We now say we are an SSD club. We also offer some plus tips, but we changed our primary dance level. We changed our self-identity and our focus. So when we have dancers that graduate our SSD lessons, they become members in full immediately. They are dancers. We welcome them with open arms. They're right at our target market, at our new redefined target. And yes, someday they may learn how to do some of the extra stuff, but we've changed what we intend to do. So to answer the question about the clubs doing SSD, are they mainstream or plus clubs? They are SSD clubs now. This was the hard change, the difficult emotional thing that we worked our way through. And that's where the success is coming in. And this is, I think, the identifying factor between the folks that have had, that are showing the dramatic success with the social square dance program, versus some that have tried it for a while and it didn't show much success with them, and then they went away with it. That's because they still saw themselves as, we're a mainstream club, and yeah, we're going to let SSD dancers come to our dances at some point. Well, no, they didn't really embrace the program. They tried to just use it as a milestone to get to what they perceive of as true full club membership. Those are the ones that have not shown a lot of growth. So it's tough. I don't want to say it's easy. I don't want to make it sound simple, but it is beneficial and effective. Okay, I think that answers the question, Bonnie.
Okay. The next one, again, there were 2 different parts of it. Would we see SSD halls at major festivals? And would this take the place of the mainstream hall, or would they have a separate hall?
I think we're going to see evolution over time with this. And I think we're going to see it as sort of the square dance market dictates. If the SSD program grows in adoption across the country, as it looks like it probably will, then I think our major festivals and conventions are going to respond to that and respect it. If the SSD program does not turn out to be a panacea, if it does not turn out to be wonderful, well, then it probably won't get as much attention at the festivals. But those of us that have tried it kind of think that it will be successful in many areas. One of the objections that a number of groups have raised over the last few years is they pointed at the status of this social square dance program within CALLERLAB and said, oh, it's an experimental program. And because it's not an official program, we're not interested. We only do the official stuff. Guys, that changed 2 days ago. It changed. This is now an official dance program of CALLERLAB. This has the same stature and status as mainstream, as plus, as challenge, right there alongside it. So that objection in the eyes of the people that only want to stay with official program, that objection's now gone away. So will we see it at major festivals and conventions? I kind of think so. I'm now going to offer a personal opinion, and you know, if it were me, I would use SSD as a replacement for the basic program. I would continue to keep the mainstream program as it is. I would use SSD as the first step, and then doubling in complexity to a full up mainstream program, and then adding another roughly 50% complexity to get to plus. And then advanced is like a doubling of complexity, and then challenge 1 is another doubling of complexity. You know, so the steps are roughly the same in relative growth in complexity as you go forward, but they build upon each other. You know, so I think the SSD is a good halfway point to mainstream. Personally, I'd like to see it replace advanced. We'll see what the market says over time. That'll be a lot of discussion among callers and viewers, a lot of energetic discussion, shall we say.
Yeah, well, and I would like to add, not only having been involved with our local regional festival for many years, and I know that there are some other California festival chairmen on this call, and also as the co-chairman of the next California State Square Dance Convention, a lot of it will depend, number one, on the hall availability. What can we afford to rent? Number two, how many clubs do embrace it? 2 weeks ago, last weekend, we had our Handy Capable call for the USDA webinar series. And in California, for example, Southern California conventions get a drawing of Handy Capable dancers. We don't really have Handy Capable dancers in Northern California anymore. And the group from Southern California won't travel to the northern part of the state, so we won't offer a Handy Capable program. And I think it will be the same way. If we've got enough clubs in the northern part of the state, or the central to northern, that there is an interest in a handy or in an SSD hall, we would probably offer it. But we have to see how that develops and grows. And I think that's all of it. Somebody made a good point when the festival question came up, and they said, if we do offer SSD halls at festivals, this would give those SSD dancers the opportunity to see the higher levels of dancing and make that decision whether they want to pursue that continuing education. And I think that's a good point.
Absolutely.
If other things being offered, it's like, well, gosh, I want to try that, or I maybe want to try round dancing. We hadn't been exposed to that before. I'm going to stick to SSD, but maybe around, so that's a piece to look at. But I think it really gets involved in, how many groups and clubs embrace the program.
It does. And then finally, the other little twist on that, as a former convention chairman and part of the national committees for quite a while, or national conventions for quite a while, truly you can use SSD in place of mainstream, for at least some amount of time, and maybe for an entire festival, because the mainstream dancers can all dance it. And so it's not restricting the number of people that could hit that particular hall if you replace mainstream with SSD, as opposed to limiting where the SSD dancers could go. So that's a factor that convention organizers can build into their calculations. But again, we'll see what the market winds up demanding.
Well, and another piece of that was a comment that was made is how often are the new dancers, whether they're regular new dancers or SSD dancers, how often are they going to festivals? And again, I think it comes back to, if you start your new dancers visiting other clubs, then they're going to be more inclined to go further. It's okay, well, there's a festival, there's a Saturday night hoedown, there's a this. If you start them early, encouraging them to go other places, they are going to be more apt to ultimately go to your local festivals and then your state conventions. But that's, again, part of the core of your club is, do you encourage these people to go other places? It's hard if you're the only club doing SSD in your area. It's easier if there are multiple clubs, and as you said before, you can go and visit those other clubs and generate that stimulus.
Sure. The other thing, though, is that the newest dancers, they're kind of two flavors. You get some of them that are really attracted and find a lot of emotional satisfaction in this activity. And they're the ones that are frequently most interested in travel and getting out and experimenting and joy. And they take to it like duck to water, and they're ready to go immediately. There's another group of new dancers that is not quite as committed to the activity just yet. And many times they do get drawn in over the course of a few years and then start going out. So, I don't know that you'll find every dancer is willing to go everywhere at the beginning. Certainly some of them are, but then as time goes on, they tend to start traveling more. Yes, agreed.
Right. Okay. And I think this is sort of contingent. How often are the schedules, are you scheduling SSE dances once they graduate? I think most of what you've done, the way I understood what you said, is that it's just the weekly or
every dance is an SSD dance.
Right. But for example, currently, like our association has a fifth Saturday dance, or a club will host a Saturday night hoedown different from their workshop nights. Are you seeing a trend of there being those specialty dances for SSD programs, or are you mostly depending on those weekly workshops that are your classes?
So here in this area, clubs typically held sort of relatively private lessons, but then public dances. And oftentimes the dances were on a different night than their lessons. In fact, most of the time. My club, for example, I teach on Tuesday nights and Thursday nights. We actually run two sets of beginner lessons in parallel at two different locations, about 20 minutes apart. And then we do that twice a year. So I'm teaching 4 sets of beginners every year. But we teach on Tuesdays and Thursday nights, and then we have our club dances on the 2nd, 4th, and 5th Fridays. So every club dance is an SSD dance. It might have some other tips in it, but every dance is an SSD dance. Glenview Squares, one of the clubs I mentioned, they dance on like 2nd and 4th Saturdays. Their lessons are on a Tuesday night. North Shore Squares, I think, dances twice a month as well. Woodstock Squares, one of the clubs I mentioned, the early adopters, they just do dances, regular dances, once a month. Although they have weekly lessons. They might get back into more frequent dances as their membership grows, but right now they're just once a month type thing. Our association does 2 big dances a year, 2 afternoons, one in October, usually right around Halloween, one right around New Year's Day. I don't want to say that we have special SSD dances. We don't. We have regular dances that are at the SSD level. It's sort of changing the way that the question gets asked and answered more than anything else. by the way, I'm hearing of more clubs in our association that are looking to adopt the SSD program. As we come out of COVID, they're worried about declines in membership. They expect some fraction of their dancers are not going to come back as we get back out of this hole. And so I'm hearing of several more clubs in our area that are looking to adopt the SSD program here this September as they come back out of things. So they'll be going through that cultural changes as well.
Okay. For those that aren't following the chat, I'm going to read this statement that somebody posted. My takeaway is that the social square dance is not correctly understood as just a new call list or program. It can be deployed as an innovative business strategy for square dance callers who want to operate a vital growing dance entertainment business. If no association-aligned clubs adopt it, we should anticipate callers may choose to open caller-led clubs to grow their market and get to profitability instead of losing money on a calling hobby. So that's a good thing.
I would agree with that statement 100%. Not sure who wrote it, didn't see it in the chat, but it sounds, absolutely full agreement with what was said.
It was somebody from one of our clubs. And then there's discussion on the largest national square dance convention was in 1976. And at that time, there were still no levels and it was just square dancing. And they seem to feel we started seeing the decline as they started, adding the different levels and, in essence, segregating people out.
That's not the first time that correlation has been drawn. Yeah. In many ways, this is trying to get back to that, earlier level of dancing that we were doing back at its peak. Now, I think there have been some societal changes that won't allow us to get back to a 40,000 person convention like that one in Anaheim. But I think we're seeing that the general public is responding to a simpler, more flowing, more energetic dance program, more like what they did back then. If you've ever danced to recordings of those dances, most of our dancers today cannot dance what they did back then because it's too fast and in many ways it's too repetitive for them. Yet that's where the popularity really came through. So this is in many ways a step back towards our roots of that time. Good observation.
Yeah. And this kind of harkens back to when do you offer them? Comment from Karen and Harry Davis from Northern California. They said, we believe new dancers should be offered club membership after a short period of time. For their club, which is the Clutch Busters, they do a 10-week program. Now, this is Gary Kendall's club. Gary has been running.
I know Gary.
Okay, he's been running a similar program, but not doing the multi-cycles from what Karen and Harry had told me, that he runs the 10-week program and then they get invited to join the club and then they go on from there. But they, do become part. Harry and Karen, am I correct on that statement?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Say hi to Gary Kendall for me, if you would. He gets out to the Iowa State Convention just about every year. And so we have a chance to see each other in Iowa every now and then. So nice.
All right.
Good.
So that's the last of the current questions. I'm going to go back to one of the ones that was asked early on. And I think this is where it'll open up some of the discussion. So again, I'm going to ask you, if you have a comment, let's do them one at a time and then remute yourself so that everybody can hear clearly. Have clubs in California tried this program? And if so, how did they feel about it? Do they feel it was a successful in expanding their club? I do know that Kip Garvey had been running this program with his Jackson Claim Jumpers. Scott Pierce, you may have more information on this. Tom Kaiser, I know that you had started working this program for your club and you got hung up with COVID. So I'm going to ask you to comment on that shortly. And I know that one of our other Northern California callers was going to be on the call today. She is currently teaching an SD class which is why she's not on the call and wanted it recorded. So I'm going to ask first, let's go to Tom, if you'll answer first, and then we'll take others if you have comments.
Sure. So my club in Grass Valley had decided to try the SSD program, and I really appreciated the board thinking hard about this and realizing, as they were seeing some decline in membership, that they needed to do something differently. And so the idea of potentially 3 or 4 new classes a year was very appealing to them. So we started in February, and I think we had about 7 new dancers in that group, and they were progressing along very well. From the caller standpoint, the program is very easy to use. It didn't feel that much different than starting a normal new class, but the suggested modules and choreography in the CALLERLAB teaching guide for SSD was very clear, very useful. And so the program was going along very well. I look forward to resuming that post-COVID. So as Barry said, you won't see immediate results, but it's the cumulative effect of when you do get a second class and then a third class, and they all start bringing their friends more frequently, we would expect to see membership increase from that.
Thank you, Tom. Anybody else that has tried the program in California or is looking at trying it? Harry and Karen, even though it's only been a once a year, what are your experiences with the growth of your club?
Bonnie, could I just mention one or two other things? So that program has gone really well in my Grass Valley club. And I've had discussions with folks in my club at Marysville, and they are very much interested in trying SSD when we resume after COVID, as well as my third club, Capital City Squares, has started to talk about employing SSD there too. So there's a lot of good discussion, a lot of good interest in the greater Sacramento area for.
Oh, I'm glad to hear about Capital City Squares trying it out. That's good.
Yep.
Thank you, Bonnie. So for Clutch Busters, we have already for probably 2 years before COVID been doing more than 1 class in a year. And usually we dance alternate, what we call red and green during class nights, and we've gone through plus. Our board will be the ones deciding what we'll do with SSD for Clutch Busters.
Okay, thank you, Karen. A question came up, has anyone introduced the program into a school system? I know that's a little tougher in California with all of the laws and regulations about who can be in a classroom and all of that, but it's a good question to ask. Has anybody worked with a school program?
From my perspective, I have not heard of anybody introducing this into a public school program. We have heard of several places that have used it with homeschool programs to great success. In fact, I mentioned the Sigmund family getting the whole families of people at their squares. They worked a lot with homeschool programs to bring this together. There's also some continuing work at CALLERLAB to establish a certified square dance teacher program. The notion is that we can sort of accredit somebody through the professional organization as meeting the standards of an instructor to help take those certificates as sort of a proof of accreditation into a school system to help unlock some of the doors to let people in. That's kind of a continuing bit of work being done by CALLERLAB that's independent of SSD.
Well, I think that's a great idea. I do know a few years ago, our association here in the Sacramento Valley had participated in the California Homeschool Association conference. And one of the big things that came out of that convention participation was that the homeschool people liked Contra. because Contra was more simplified. You know, the thought of them having to commit every week for 9 months to classes really was a distraction to them. They weren't interested in square dancing in general. They liked Contra because they could go, they could learn the dances that night. And then if they weren't able to go back for 2 or 3 months, they could still go and learn the dances for that night, dance all night, and move on. This SSD program might be something to think about going back and looking at participating in a homeschool program in California in their convention, and see if we can introduce it from this standpoint where it's simpler, more repetitive. They can get their kids involved in all of that. So that,
and it fits more nicely into a traditional semester.
yes.
Bonnie, I had some experience working with homeschool group in Wilton. We had 4 squares of homeschooled children, and we went about 8 months. The mother that was organizing it was very excited with the success of it. That was the fall of 18 and winter of 2019. That she said maybe in the fall of 2019 we can also start round dancing for the homeschool kids, the older ones. And then she ended up moving her family to Utah to care for her aging parents. So nobody else picked up the reins, and the program died at that point. But Steve Riley is actually thinking of becoming a vendor to organize homeschooling square dancing again. So maybe we'll see resurgence of that. But they were very much enjoying square dancing, and it wasn't the kind of thing that they wanted anything easier like Contra.
Well, I think it wasn't so much that it was easier, except that they didn't want to have to commit to a long-term weekly program. And that was sort of the repeated message we kept getting, because they had so many other things going on that it was that long-term commitment that they didn't want to make. For those of you who don't know who Steve Riley is, Steve is the youth advisor for the California Council of Square Dancers. So he's been trying to be very active in our youth programs and all of that. Anybody else? Let's see. Does SSD rely on other clubs to transition dancers to other levels?
You know, not any more than any other sort of level change. Again, it depends on what the club perceives of themselves as an identity. My group, we teach 0 to SSD, and then for those that want to continue, I typically offer an SSD to plus class, and I might only do that once every 2 years. You know, not necessarily every year, but let dancers get established, and give them an opportunity. Certainly, if dancers in this club want to go off and do advanced, well, yeah, they usually do work with other clubs for that. So it sort of depends on what the club wants to do, whether they want to do their continuing education within the club or to rely on other groups. So I'm not sure really how best to answer that, other than it works the same way as, say, mainstream to plus type thing.
Okay. I would like to see, we've really got people from all over the state on this call. Chime in if the SSD program is something that you are either already doing or are looking at doing, or, you know, once we open up to dancing. I'd like to see some feedback if possible.
I've been teaching SSD in San Francisco for 4 years. Works fine. Cannot convince the club to do more than 1 class a year, though. We do good with graduates, but the call for people to become plus dancers, and if you're not a plus dancer, you're not worth spit, is a heavy thing.
That's a tough burden, isn't it, Jim?
It is very tough.
Yeah, and that's the difficult self-identity change I've been talking about. And if a club can make that transition or through a lot of discussion and self-introspection and deciding what they really want, you can make that transition and switch that mindset. And that's when the growth happens. Now, if the growth isn't of interest to them, well, it's not going to happen. And that's where, as the folks from Martinez Swingers might have mentioned, that's where you might see a new club pop up.
I had a club in Sunnyvale go out of business because they would rather go out of business than dance anything other than plus.
Yep. And that's okay. That's okay. We'll live without them. We'll go on. We'll start a new club and go on.
Jim,
Yeah, I don't want to.
Ruffles and Bows in San Diego intends to.
Wait. One at a time.
I should say, I don't want to threaten to start new clubs and use that as a bludgeon to get anybody to change. However, it is a market out there, and folks are providing services, and we may see things spontaneously start if there are markets not being served. And that's okay. That's perfectly fine.
Ken Shelby, I think you were the next one trying to speak.
Yes, Ruffles and Bows in San Diego intends to start using the SSD program when we get back to dancing.
Great, thank you. Somebody asked a question, and I'm not 100% sure what you mean. So Carl McLaren, you asked this question: what other workshops are offered in SSD? Can you explain that question?
Yeah, there used to be, when I started, there used to be APD and DVD. I haven't seen anything in San Diego for a long time, or since I've been here, and they kind of went away where I started dancing up north. Are there no workshops in that area? Are there any other workshops with SSD or potential?
Well, I guess the SSD program itself is aimed at standard applications, standard arrangements, a limited call list. Anything that's kind of outside of that beginning entry level service is certainly a workshop or an extra lesson or something like that. We do have all kinds of other learning opportunities for those that are in the hobby and committed to it. We do have many other learning opportunities for them in this area. With dancing by definition for mainstream and plus folks, with advanced and challenge lessons for those that want to go on. Wherever there's a market, we see things come out. But those are all above and beyond the social square dance program itself, because it is limited to just that program by definition is limited to this entry level beginning thing. Certainly, a very first step in continuing education might be to explore the set of 50 calls from different formations and arrangements and try them out in different ways. So sort of like a DBD for SSD, if you like that alphabet soup. But that's just kind of continued growth beyond the initial what do you expect new dancers to know.
But that's not a program you've been using or you're even thinking about.
Oh, I teach DBD workshops all summer. I teach 2 sets of beginner lessons, one in the fall and one in the spring, and then use summer for all of my extra workshop-y things. So yeah, I teach that stuff.
Thank you.
Barry, the question for you and I guess for the others is, if you've still got your mainstream and plus clubs or these specialty groups, they're not being held at the same time as your SSD program, correct? Or you may be doing part of it. For example, if a club, and maybe Tom can answer this, is your entire club going to the SSD, or are you having your SSD workshops on one night and your mainstream plus whatever club on another night?
Like this summer, I'll be doing SSD workshops on Tuesday nights and plus workshops on Thursday nights.
Okay.
Back to those 2 locations that we use that we teach for beginners, we'll just actually use the same location 2 nights a week. But yeah, we don't. And that's because, honestly, that location is 45 minutes travel each direction for me, and I'm still working a lot. So for me to finish up the end of the workday, get over there, I've got about 2 hours before I have to turn around and drive back home to get home in a reasonable time. So I can't do multiple workshops of a duration on a single evening. But that's just me.
Right.
Others may have other capabilities.
Other options, yeah.
And in my Grass Valley Club, the evening would be divided that the first hour and a half was the SSD, and then short break, and then 45 minutes of plus dancing.
Very
Okay.
nice.
And the plus
Good.
dancers were there to be angels for the SSD dance.
Great. I'm seeing comments, the TAM Twirlers, which happens to be Eric Canterlaw's club, is considering whether to change to SSD. They've had one board meeting to discuss it, and we'll discuss it further, but there's been no decision yet. Martina Swingers, I was going to ask you, but they've launched a board level introduction, board level introduction of SSD. We'll broaden that to club after we restart. Possible for us to run SSD on Wednesday and combine plus and advanced on Tuesdays, since we already operate 2 nights a week. So that's another option. This one is from San Diego, Jim and Patty. Our mindset needs to be, it's not important what we dance, it's more important that we are dancing. And I think Jim said that multiple times, and I think it's a very good statement.
Hey, Bonnie, could I jump in for just a second?
Sure, Scott.
And mine is really a question for Tom, and you already addressed it with your Grass Valley group, Tom. But the other 2 groups that you call for that are considering going to SSD, I'm curious about their mindset, about whether the officers of those clubs understand that to go to SSD, it has to be a destination program if it's going to be successful, or are they still looking at using SSD as a stepping stone to get to the level they dance now?
I don't think there's been enough discussion amongst the boards really to have thought that far. They're more focused right now on, gosh, what can we do differently in order to increase membership? So I guess as a caller, one of my responsibilities will be to help them understand what SSD is really about. And so a lot of the very good points that Barry made in his presentation about it, giving full value to SSD itself and supporting those dancers, and that point of forget about rushing to other levels, but let's just have fun dancing with lots of people. So as much as I can do as a caller to help them understand that and fully support SSD, I think will help contribute to the success of it.
And as callers, Tom and Scott, you guys have a great deal of influence, and don't underestimate the impact that you can have on those discussions and conversations.
Okay, first I want to make a comment. I was told that people have their hands up with their hands up function. I unfortunately am not seeing that on my end, so I do apologize that I'm not addressing you, but I'm just not seeing the raised hand piece.
Lonnie and Eric have had their hands raised for some time.
Okay.
Can I talk a minute? I would like to ask Barry if SSD supports all position dancing. I'm a widow. My husband and I danced for years with a club here in San Diego and advanced to plus. But when I returned after his death, I went back to learn the male part so that I could be able to dance. Does SSD support that?
Well, I guess it depends on quite how you define that word all position. Certainly we have a number of women in our classes that dance left side, as it were, that dance the men's part. And we have a number of men that dance the ladies' part. And so, we try, I'm sure as the experience like with Capital City Squares and others, Sometimes we use the same gender-dependent words, men and ladies, but just referring to where a dancer started as opposed to trying to imply anything. By all means, we encourage dancers to, particularly those that would like to learn more that have come back, to try dance, learn to dance either side. However, we don't tend within the SSD program, because it's aimed at quote standard arrangements, we don't tend to have dancers switch sides during a tip. We might put them into a half sashayed arrangement for a little bit, but we don't expect them to know how to do everything always from a half sashayed or a boy girl arrangement all the time. So would you be welcome and enjoyed at any of our dances? By all means, absolutely. Would you necessarily get the DBD flavor of it? Well, no, you wouldn't. So not sure quite how best to answer the question, but I hope that worked.
Thank you.
Okay, I am seeing the hands up now. Eric, you want to go ahead and make your comment or question?
Did we lose Eric? Or maybe muted? Doesn't look muted.
Yeah, I see the hand still up, but I'm just getting a buzzing sound.
We might have to come back to you. Oh, there's the mute button on Eric.
Okay, so
we might have to come back to Eric, I'm afraid. I'll come back later, he says. Yes.
Yeah, I see that now. So anybody else have a question or comment that they would like to contribute? I think Russ Foster, I saw you in one of the comments, if you're on board. I know you're from the Central Coast area, and square dancing has been dwindling in numbers for some time. Are any of the clubs down in your area looking at trying the SSD program?
We're beginning to discuss it. There's a few, I think, on this call. So we're starting to discuss it. What the association will do, we don't know. And I think that's something the hoedowners are going to be discussing shortly and see where we go. We are trying to, we know we can't keep doing the same thing. So we've got to change, and this may be the direction we go.
Okay, thank you. Eric, you want to give it a try again?
I'm going to try again. I actually unplugged all my hardware that I bought for my work computer. Can anyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay,
Thank you.
And I think you could probably see me now too.
Yes.
This is my COVID haircut. I have not had it cut in a long time, except I did my bangs myself. My wife was horrified. So horrified that she's actually up in Oregon now with my grandson and son. So she's not even here. That's how horrified me cutting my bangs was for her. But in North County, San Diego, all the normal club, well, I shouldn't say normal clubs, all but the advanced club have committed that they're going to try SSD for a couple of years. My concern is that they're going to stop after 2 years when the benefits are just about to take off. But that's another point. I am 100% in line with Jim Masco, who says it doesn't matter what level we're dancing as long as we're dancing. And at the rate we're going now, we won't be dancing. And I started in 2009. In 12 more years, my club will be gone. At the rate we're going, we started with, probably 10 or 15 more dancers than we have now, but our age has increased. I was the youngest dancer when I started at 50. Now I'm the youngest dancer in our club who dances regularly, and I'm 60. So I think that this SSD is a chance to really turn square dancing into what the angels that we have learned back in the 70s, which is they took a 10-week class and suddenly they were square dancers. And, now when I started, it was 3 classes a year that started, although they didn't all finish in 1 year. They were 17 weeks plus 17 weeks. So it was a 34-week class. It was a struggle to stay in. We lost a lot of dancers along the way. and most of those we lost after they'd learned 50 calls. We took a short break around the holidays at Christmas. We transitioned, from the early class to the late class with the second group, and we lost I can't even tell you how many dancers we lost. And all of them went home and they told their friends, everyone they worked with, all their friends, how hard it was, how old we were. And I think SSD is really a chance to turn this around. I'm really heartened that North County San Diego is involved. Ken Shelby said that the Ruffles and Bows are going to be starting out with SSD. I think most of the South San Diego clubs as well are going to try SSD. I just hope that we stick to it long enough that we really see the benefits of it. Is there anyone who's familiar with the association down south who can jump in and say, if all the clubs down there are doing that, Jim, or maybe Ken?
I don't think everybody's made a final decision. I think there's still going to be an association meeting coming up here shortly, actually June 2nd, where there'll be more advocates to explain the program and see what clubs are really going to do, because it really does sound like California is going to get to open up and start square dancing as of June 15th with no more restrictions. And I think that we're going to be good to go.
By the way, I did a similar presentation last weekend to the Los Angeles area's clubs, and they have almost unanimously agreed to try it. I think there's one club that wasn't interested and one that was still on the fence, but every other club in that group has agreed to go forward with this program as well. Eric, your comments were spot on. What you related has been seen time and time again in place after place after place. You're exactly right, and I completely agree with all that you said. Thanks.
Either Joe or Mary, Joe Den or Mary, San Jose, Santa Clara area, are any of your clubs currently doing an SSD program or something similar?
So it's Joe Dean, by the way.
Dean, I'm sorry.
So some of the there are a couple of clubs, a couple of the IGSDC clubs that are in the Bay Area. A few years before the pandemic, started a kind of a multi-cycle arrangement where the first third of the way to Plus was almost exactly SSD. This was not the SSD approach to organizing clubs, but they were using that list. And in conjunction with that, the Santa Clara Valley Square Dancers Association also switched our, what we call our general dance series, which was association-sponsored dances, into a multi-level format in which the largest number of tips were also essentially SSD. So I would echo the comment of whoever was talking about festivals and conventions and how they organize their halls. I would echo that comment and say that it's really up to the clubs and the instructors what kind of teaching they want to do, what programs they want to produce dancers who can dance. And then from my perspective, our association is already prepared to adapt our functions that we produce, that we sponsor, to accommodate those dancers if they exist. And I don't think we haven't had any formal discussion in our association about trying to switch the entry-level clubs to SSD, but I could imagine local clubs doing that. And if they do that, we're ready to do that, to support that with our general dances. And we actually did some of that the last time we had our annual festival. We also had sessions which were essentially programmed at we didn't use the term SSD, but it was practically the same list. And as other festivals have found, often the halls that have a limited number of calls, a smaller program, can often be the most popular halls if there's something else about them that make them popular. If there's some if they have the more well-known callers, or if they have some other activity going on in there that makes them attractive. Everybody who dances every program can, in theory, dance the SSD program as well. So it doesn't have to limit attendance.
Thank you, Joe. And I think that kind of brings up a good point that, you know, communication is going to be important. I think we're going to need to communicate with the other clubs in our area that your club is offering an SSD program. And when we get into the festivals and the party dances and, you know, the conventions, we need to have a consistent message. You know, we need to all say it's the SSD program, because there's been, you know, some have called it the 50 calls. Some of them have called SSD. You guys have done the community dance program. So I think we need to have a consistent nomenclature so that, you know, just like plus or advanced or mainstream, everybody knows that if you say mainstream, it, you know, they know what mainstream is, so that it encourages that interaction. It's like, you know, if they community dance program, well, I don't do that, I do SSD. Well, they're the same, but the people don't always know that.
Well, just for clarification, community dance program is an entirely different thing.
Okay.
That's more like a level to be used more like for party dances for people who haven't taken lessons for weeks and weeks.
Got it.
You might be confusing. We had in our area, we developed a program which we called the General Dance Program, which was somewhat similar in spirit to SSD, but it was a different list because rather than being kind of half as hard to learn as mainstream, which is sort of the spirit of one of the spirits behind SSD. Since we are traditionally an entirely plus area, we had no mainstream clubs at all. We tried to do a similar thing in the spirit of half as hard to learn as plus. And so we had a list that was designed with that particular target in mind. And we did have association dances at that level because we totally agree with the idea that whatever you're teaching, you've got to have dancing at that level. It makes no sense to teach new people something and then say, oh, you got to learn other stuff before you can be a real square dancer. So our idea was come up with a new level that was that took half as long to learn as plus, and we would support it. And the problem was the clubs wouldn't support it. The clubs did not go along with that. The clubs were not willing to re-identify themselves in that way, even as part of their program. And part of the resistance was, as Barry mentioned, this idea that's come up all across the country. Well, it's not an official level. How can we do that? And we really suffered for that. And I'm hoping that SSD will not run into that problem now that it has gotten official blessing by the membership of CALLERLAB. And the dances that we originated to support the level we were trying to create to do the same thing, those are the dances that we then reprogrammed as we saw that people were starting to use the SSD list in some ways as part of their teaching plan. That's when we switched to our multi-level dance format, in which essentially the SSD list is the base level. And we also include other levels of tips, but I'm very happy to see Barry say that he, as the vice chair of the SSD committee, apparently considers it okay to have a mixed SSD and higher level.
To think otherwise is just foolishly restrictive. It's not going to happen in the real world. You know, we will.
What's not going to happen in the real world?
A single limited program, only pure SSD, nothing else.
Right.
That's just not realistic.
So the way I see us proceeding, assuming that there are clubs, and when people talk about the clubs having to re-identify and the clubs have to make this transition, they don't all necessarily have to do that. And it doesn't have to be the existing clubs. The sad truth is that we don't have that many plus clubs left anymore either. And It may be that some of the callers who are most enthusiastic about SSD are not the callers for existing clubs. And if they start new clubs to teach and to follow the SSD plan, create new SSD clubs where SSD is the destination, and some of the existing plus clubs just keep going being plus calls and plus clubs, and they can teach those SSD to plus classes. They may be much smaller clubs than they ever were, but they'll be serving those people who want to learn plus, and that's fine. I don't care who does it. If somebody produces SSD dancers, then I think we should be prepared to support them with dances that have lots of SSD tips and a hall at our festival which lets them dance.
Bonnie, on that note, I think I'm going to have to drop off. Actually, we have to go do a dance workshop. Joe, it's a 3A dance workshop here this afternoon. So thank you so much for the opportunity to talk. I've passed on a copy of my presentation to Bonnie. She'll feel free to distribute that however you so choose. So thank you all very much. It's been a really pleasant conversation. Have a good day.
And Barry, I want to thank you very much for coming in and taking the time to do this program with us. I saw a couple of more hands up even after Barry leaves. If there are a couple of you that want to have discussion, we can hang on for a few more minutes. But Barry, again, thank you so much. I'm so glad I met you in that chat room, and hopefully I'll meet you in person soon. Thank you so much.
Take care.
All right. I know Scott Pierce had his hand up, but he took it down. Eric, you have your hand up still.
Sorry, I'll take that down.
Oh, okay. Does anybody else have any comments they want to make before we close this up? I see Carl, you had a hand up.
I was going to try to get a clarification from Barry. The mathematics, he kind of implied that in two different definitions. One was that the SSD was a 3-month program, 12 weeks, and that later on he said that the SSD was a 24-hour program. That works out to be able to as 2 hours a session for once a week, 2 hours for 3 months to get through the program, which is what I always thought the classes should be. But I noticed over the last years that I was supporting them, a lot of the clubs went to a two-level class, and it was only an hour and a half. And that was really, I always felt was the really what was killing the class program was that it was only an hour and a half instead of 2 hours. And I wanted to get his comments on that, but he didn't have enough time.
Well, I do know in the various discussions I've heard about the SSD program, people have commented that it depends, they're saying anywhere from an hour and a half to 2.5 hours, depending on your format and setup and what works for your group. So I think, that obviously impacts the number of actual weeks it runs, depending on how long each of your workshop sessions is able to run.
We all have to be prepared for flexibility in that sense. So when I was running SSD with my Grass Valley Club, it was just an hour and a half each week for the SSD group. But we kept moving right along on schedule. We got through the first 7 weeks of it. But it's all going to depend on the makeup of your class. From year to year, sometimes you get the classes that just move along really quickly, and then other years it'll be classes that just don't catch on as quickly. So it may take longer for some groups than others, and you just have to work with that.
Okay. Somebody made the comment about sending out the presentation. We're going to have the presentation posted to the California Council of Square Dancers website. Joe is our webmaster, and so he's going to get those posted for me as soon as I send him the presentation.
There's the URL of our website.
There you go. And so, you know, please feel free to go out and pick that up. And we're going to, if I can get the recording to Joe, then we'll have the recording up there as well. Any other comments or questions people have? Oh, Mary has her hand up.
I just wanted to thank you, Bonnie, for arranging this. This is the best presentation on SSD that I've heard. And I really, Barry was incredible. You can pass that along to him, but I know that you spearheaded it. So thank you very much for doing that.
Oh, you're quite welcome. I just really felt the need because I know there was a lot of discussion in Southern California and we just weren't getting it up here. And so, you know, I wanted people to have the chance to make an informed decision. And you're right. I think Barry's presentation is one of the best I've seen on the program. So I will provide him with that feedback, but thank you very much.
Yeah, and I agree with you that there's confusion on it. There's been confusion on SSD over the years. And so I thought he did a really great job of clarifying and making it clear what it was and what it wasn't and things that are acceptable. And that was really great.
Well, thank you very much, Mary. Jay Aldrich, I wanted to ask you, do you know of any other clubs in ASDSC, aside from the ones that have already been mentioned, that are even considering the SSD program?
Yes, so Tom has 3 of the clubs there that he mentioned. Oroville is in discussion. The Mavericks and is talking about it. They're actually Mavericks is actually going forward. They do a 2-night-a-week dance, and so Holly is going to be doing I think the Monday night version, and then they're also it's also discussion in Oroville. So
that's great.
You know, with our 13 clubs, we got 3 of them that are advanced. One of them is in danger of folding. So out of our 9+ ones that we have left, we have 6 of them which are at least considering social square dancing at this point, which is kind of like Joe was mentioning before. Like you know, this whole area here is 100% plus or better. So it's a different way of thinking. So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I do want to share, and I'm sure it was Jim Masco that reminded me. Those of you that aren't already familiar, United Square Dancers of America, which is the national dancers organization, we have been doing monthly webinars on various topics. And we do have another program on SSD. It's our July presentation. It will be done by Bear Miller from Denver and Deborah Carroll Jones. The 2 of them are going to do a presentation on SSD. So if you want more information, or if your club is thinking about it and haven't made a final decision, that July webinar will be a good opportunity to learn more and maybe get more of your club members participating so that they can hear from themselves. I know a lot of people, you know, they don't want just one person telling them, they want to hear it from different people. So that will be another opportunity. Normally we do those webinars on the 2nd Saturday of the month, which that will be in July. And normally we do it at 11 o'clock Pacific. That particular workshop will be at 10 a.m. Pacific. Again, Bear Miller has another commitment afterwards, so he agreed to shift the time. So it'll be the 2nd Saturday of July at 10 a.m. Pacific time. So I encourage you to participate in that one as well if you have more questions. Anybody else have comments or questions they would like to make before we close? I see a hand up, John. You're still muted, John.
Okay, now?
There you go.
Can you hear me? Okay, great. I loved how comprehensive Barry's information was, and in listening to it, it made me think of some other stories. I just wanted to make this comment. I don't know the other callers out there since Barry's left the Zoom room. But years ago, we had it in one of the plus clubs I was in. We had an interim caller who I think it was, this was because some of the plus people were maybe in some way putting down some of the idea of mainstream or something like that. I can't remember how it all happened, but he did that interim caller did a really tough mainstream, and I think he purposely wanted to trip us up. So what it just reminded me of that mainstream itself can be a lot not tricky, but a lot different than we might be used to if a caller knows how to do it, to that effect. And so that was one comment I just wanted to make. And this is the first time I've been part of these Zoom situations on these Saturday mornings, and I'm glad to be a part of it. I was wondering if one of them already happened that was on the subject of recruiting, or might there one be in the future on recruiting? Because in a club that I used to be in that folded, Pleasant and Singles and Pairs, we just tried as hard as we could to get to recruit people different ways. Word of mouth when I started 30 years ago used to be good enough, but maybe it's not anymore. But the thing is, I just was wondering if that might be a subject, unless it has already been done. Thank you.
Sorry, I was just posting something. The USDA webinar back in February featured Mike Hogan, who is an internationally known square dance caller, but also works for iHeartMedia. And he did a marketing presentation for square dancing for us that was absolutely excellent. If you want to hear that recording and get his handouts, you can go to the USDA website, www.usda.org, and hear that recording. He also has done presentations for several other groups, and in particular, it focused on marketing square dancing and promoting square dancing, especially during these challenging times of COVID. It's an excellent, excellent presentation, and I encourage you to go out and hear that.
Thank you. And his name again is?
It's Mike Hogan, Hogan. He is also the one that really spearheaded the marketing manual that appears on the CALLERLAB website. There were several others involved, but he was really the one that took charge of putting that together. And that's another excellent document that you can go out to the CALLERLAB website, which is CALLERLAB, CALLERLAB.org, and look for that marketing manual.
Thank you very much, Bonnie.
You're quite welcome. Any other comments or questions? And I want to thank you all for giving up part of your Saturday to participate with us and learn and share your thoughts and opinions and what you've been doing. And I hope we continue this level of communication amongst us, because square dancing is not going to survive unless we all work together and we all help to build our clubs back up to what they used to be. So any other comments from anybody?
Yeah, I would like to add on the Mike Hogan marketing. If you go to the California Square Dance Council, that website, which you've already got, they have a link to the USDA, and it's listed under webinars. Mike Hogan is not listed, but it's called Promoting Square Dancing. And that's the slide deck from there. There may or may not be a video from that presentation, but I was at that one. I missed almost all the rest. But that one was extremely well done and extremely useful.
Yeah, and we are looking forward, as we move forward, we've got the social square dance program, and then another big topic that's come up in the last few months is the sociability of square dancing. In a lot of cases, we've lost that social connections aspect of square dancing. It's become, in many cases, like going to a movie. You go in the door, you pay your money, you dance, you leave. You don't really get to know the other people on the dance floor. You don't go out and do other things with them. And Mike Seastrom has really been spearheading this social connections committee for CALLERLAB. He did the keynote for the CALLERLAB convention. He is the keynote speaker at the National Square Dance Convention in Jackson, Mississippi this year. And he is going to do our August webinar for USDA on the social connections of school and how we get back to where your square dance friends become your square dance family, not just somebody you met on the dance floor and only see them once a week. So a lot of good things coming forward, and we hope that people continue to share and learn from these programs that we're offering. Anything else anybody wants to share or have a question with? All right, we've gone well over the time that we anticipated, but again, it's for a good cause. And I do thank you all. I thank Barry, and I will pass on your comments to him. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me at my email address. I'll post it in the Zoom, but it's B as in boy, J, and then my last name, Abramson, ABRAMSON@gmail.com. If you have any other questions that you want to forward to Barry, I can do that for you. Or if you want to be added to the list to get direct notifications about some of these webinars, I'm happy to add you to that list. I'm just making sure that I spelled it right in the, so, you know, I would love to have your feedback. Thank you all so much. I'm going to end the recording, and you all have a great day.
Thanks,
Enjoy
Bonnie.
the rest of your weekend. You're quite welcome.